Hey, I'm Bencho. Today, I want to talk about MOTORSLICE. If you're a returning viewer, you'll probably recognize that I've reviewed quite a few games where you traverse a megastructure in some sort of grungy apocalyptic scenario. And you'll soon see that MOTORSLICE falls neatly into this genre of game, which I've been calling structure crawlers. I've been following the development of MOTORSLICE for a couple years now. When I finally got to play it in early May, it was everything I wanted and more, until it very quickly wasn't. Let's get into it. The premise of MOTORSLICE is a simple one. You control a chainsaw-wielding girl named P, tasked with destroying corrupted machines in a giant abandoned concrete jungle in the middle of the desert. Notice how I said control instead of play as, because technically you, the player, are a floating droid that P affectionately calls Orby. This is just a creative choice for the most part, essentially just personifying the third-person camera, but I wanted to point it out because the developer does an incredible job adding interactions with this otherwise absent character in the game in ways that are both subtle, not so subtle, and also in ways that serve to enhance and detract from the gameplay experience. P is a slicer whose job is to destroy machines, corrupted AI that take on the form of mostly construction equipment throughout a giant living compound that P refers to as an alpha structure.
An alpha structure that can control all the machines. Do you think that's true?
You journey through the level using the pinnacle of platformer mechanics, parkour. At the end of each chapter, of which there are 8 in total, you defeat a Shadow of the Colossus-like boss, usually taking the form of a giant front loader or sentient crane. There is a bit of a story, illustrated through segmented cutscenes where Slicer P waxes on about the job sometimes, or maybe alludes to some minor world-building lore snippet, but most of the time, the cutscenes mostly consist of P striking a pose and saying some complete nonsense, and at worst, doing some bullshit that I'll get to later on.
Hey look, I found some weird holes.
First, let's talk about the good parts of MOTORSLICE. The platforming in this game for a majority of my time playing it was incredibly seamless and felt effortless. All of the interactions from vaulting, wall running, climbing, and a unique movement mechanic named after the game, motor slicing, where you move up select walls via jamming your chainsaw into them, are all dynamic and situational, and make the platforming very entertaining. The combat, while simple, is satisfying. There's a generous parry mechanic that tickles my brain, and they utilize it well for various combat situations. For example, there's an enemy that launches buzzsaws at you that you can parry once to block, and if you parry again in a brief window after, you can send the buzzsaw flying back towards the enemy with a satisfying metallic clunk sound. The levels feel dynamic, with an effective use of both wide open areas that help outline the sheer size of the structure, and small, claustrophobic platforming hallways that remind the player that the structure is both gigantic and dense. The platforming puzzles feel manicured and intentional, and utilize mechanics in unique ways, like the ability to parry dangerous traps like you would an enemy to bypass otherwise impossible terrain, and each chapter of the game has a creative way of introducing that chapter's boss, helping build anticipation for the boss fight that bookmarks the inevitable end of that section of the game. Now, that's the extent of what I would consider the objective positives of MOTORSLICE. I wanted to get them out of the way now because, unfortunately, for the rest of what I have to say about MOTORSLICE is not very positive. I've said this before for many other games. MOTORSLICE is a good game. It is alright. And I've been getting pushback pretty consistently on when I've said good is not good enough. Because for some reason, as consumers, we've developed a strange softness for the 6 or 5s of games. I'm sure the reason for this is the usual suspects. Personal opinions and investment, people's tendency to think in binary, yes or no, good or bad, quality or slop. But in addition to this, in today's gaming culture, there is this overprotectiveness of games that are just satisfactory. And I believe this comes from the massive amount of games so readily available to us, diluting our expectations and opinions on what makes a game worth our time. If I were to review games under this social guideline, there would be no nuance, no separation between any of my reviews, unless the game was truly a masterpiece or an utter failure. But objectively, while the opinions of the gaming community will always contradict itself, you generally don't need more than 1 or 2 reviewers to tell you if a game is one of the best in its genre, or more so if it's one of the worst. What pushes a game into the extremes of the rating scale are usually observable to a passerby without much dedicated investigation. For instance, you can assume games like Expedition 33 and Baldur's Gate 3 fall under one of the extreme rating scales because people were, and still are to some degree, talking about them. So where game reviews really thrive, in my opinion, are within the realm of the 6s and 5s. Because if a game's reviews land somewhere between a C and a B, those who commit to giving it a higher or lower score usually have something very specific to say about the game that expands upon the conversation in unexpected ways. So, with that, let me tell you my very specific thing about the game MOTORSLICE.
I'm getting tired of that, Norby.
Getting the small stuff out of the way, let's talk about overconfidence. I already mentioned the movement in this game is solid, and it is, up to a certain point. At around chapter 3 or 4, the game introduces the ability to switch directions that the player is motorslicing and proceeds to add advanced motorslicing areas that require you to change directions consistently. While a fun advancement of an established mechanic, it ends up revealing the major issues with the dynamic movement system. While I did mention that your character's actions change based on the context of what the character's doing or where they are, I neglected to mention that these actions are almost entirely relegated to one of 2 buttons: your jump or attack. Motorslicing is activated by attacking a nearby valid surface. But you know what else is activated by attacking? I couldn't tell you the number of times I attempted to motorslice and ended up ground slamming myself into a fine red paste. To be blunt, this mechanic feels unconsidered. It's introduced relatively late into the game in a section that quite honestly didn't do a good job easing me into the mechanic. Oddly spaced out and laid out corridors with odd angles and frustrating turns, with an annoying run back that served to impede the learning process even more so. In turn, it exacerbated the mechanical issues that up until that point were easily overlooked. There is also an input delay in almost every action in the game, from turning, running, jumping, and parrying. Something you can easily get used to because the pacing all in all is relatively slow, but the directional motorslicing demanded a speed and reaction time that highlighted these microscopic delays and brought them front and center. This was the beginning of the mechanical end, so to speak, because from there, the issues kept mounting. It felt as though the levels past chapter 3, while seeming to be a genuine attempt to expand upon the movement system in new ways, an aspect of games that I genuinely think is overlooked these days, didn't quite land. It was exhausting to have to field this after 5 hours of gameplay. Now, I usually don't get this nitpicky on small issues like this. No game is perfect, but honestly, the most critiquable quality of MOTORSLICE, the story, casts a shadow over the whole game, and it functioned as a salt to the otherwise ignorable wound. Throughout MOTORSLICE, there are cutscenes, moments where the game lets you take a break. These cutscenes are presented in a series of moments where P laments about the assignment, but very quickly and with increased frequency do these cutscenes devolve. Please, God, no! God, please, God, no! No! Please! No! 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 So listen, I've been on the internet for a long time, and I get that for the most part, anything goes. And if you're as experienced as I am, you'd agree that what's happening in these cutscenes is tame in comparison to what you'd accidentally stumble upon while scrolling Twitter. In case you're a young, innocent cherub who sleeps in a tulip and wears a little thimble as a hat, and you've accidentally tripped and fallen onto this YouTube video, let me be as crystal clear on what these cutscenes are. They are fan service, or for the Zoomers out there, this is gooner bait. It's very obvious by the composition, framing, and intentional pauses between the slideshow-like shots that the developer's intent was for the players to linger on these shots, really contemplate them, maybe even take a few screenshots. This is made even more apparent by the absolute gibberish monologues P makes in each cutscene.
Ay, ay. Hey, what do you think? Suits me? You know nothing about style, Orby. Can't wait to find a central bunker array. They've always got a nice shampoo.
To compound it further, you can respond to her insane ramblings with one of two options. One, what I would imagine would be the most logical response to when someone says,
Hey look, I found some weird holes.
and the other, a response that's something akin to a starving man begging for but the smallest morsel of... Now I can almost hear what some of you are saying. Bencho, who cares? If the dev wants to have a badass freaking hot babe acting freaky in the game, then that's awesome, son. Well, Reddit gold user DeathSlayerXX, while I respect that you're allowed to use your free time on this beautiful planet any way you want, I think it's safe to say that the majority of people who would want to play a game like this aren't anticipating that at some point between bisecting front loaders and vaulting over meat grinders that there will be an opportunity to smell the main character's feet. I just want you to step into my shoes for a moment here, because this phenomenon happens to me more often than I could ever expect. Press the P button. What the f***? Oh my fucking god, can I even show that? What the fuck? What's that? Imagine you've recently been hanging out with a new group of friends who share your exact same interests, and you get along effortlessly. When then suddenly, one day, you're hanging out and one of them says, "Hey, anyone want to smoke crack out of this empty Mountain Dew can?" And in a split second you realize you need to get out of there as soon as physically possible. That's what it felt like playing MOTORSLICE. It isn't porn, but by playing these cutscenes, you can tell what kind of porn the developer watches. I shouldn't have to expect this in a video game. Plain and simple. Anyways, MOTORSLICE is decent, and I give it a D. It utilized tried and true mechanics in a way anyone would expect. It presented themes myself and many others have witnessed being used successfully before, yet provides very little unique vision outside of what I would consider novelty. The story is a dissonant nightmare, and that I understand by the court of the internet hive mind that makes me some sort of prude loser for disliking it. But even if you take away the weird pervert undertones of the story, the narrative has the impact of half overhearing a conversation at a bar, mildly interesting with ideal conditions and utterly forgettable under normal circumstances. Overall, I think this game is a prime example of modern indie game marketing and development. A series of clippable scenes and experiences that do well on social media, but miss the mark when experienced as the final product. The game is solid, and it doesn't betray what it is for most of the playthrough. But I feel as though there was a disconnect in what the developer's vision for MOTORSLICE the game and MOTORSLICE the brand was, ultimately diluting the end product. And with its particular flavor of dissonance, it alienates a potentially new audience from taking a chance at playing something new and different. That's going to be it for me. Have a good one.